Greater Good Radio. Connect, learn, heal, and grow. My father, from 2014, had gotten diagnosed with cancer. From then, you know how it goes. It's like a emergency mad race to help them and so on. He passed away this year, just a few months ago. And the stress of being an actual caregiver, especially if you're the primary or secondary caregiver, is so high that I always say I would rather dig a hole in concrete with a spoon in super hot sun. It is like so painful to me, at least. What is that like in terms for you? What was your experience trying to manage everything at the same time?
I'd like to maybe take an approach to this question from an angle that might surprise you. So my response to that would be that you, the caregiver, particularly of a family loved one, need to take a step back and get in touch with what your internal sense of purpose and meaning in this scenario is. That sounds super philosophical, but it's really important because what happens when you become a caregiver is you begin to lose sight of your boundaries, your personal boundaries. And that's caused in part by what you're thinking, the thoughts you're having. And a lot of them are contradictory to each other. So on the one hand, it's like, oh my gosh, I got to take care of my mom or I got to take care of my dad, all of this stuff. On the other hand, it's like, why do I have to do this? Why is this falling on me? Right? And then there's all these important decisions that you have to make. So I don't think that it's very, very rare that someone will think about doing that, but that's really what you have to do. You have to look internally first and think a lot about 10 years from now, when I'm looking back on this situation, how do I want to see me showing up here? Because I think a lot of people lose sight of their priorities and they lose sight of their boundaries when that situation becomes a part of their life. It's something they don't think about. And so they're just skimming on the surface of everything that's happening. And that's going to create stress. It's going to create a lot of internal stress because you're out of alignment. You haven't had time to process how it's affecting you.
I fully agree with that. The thing I want to add is that if someone doesn't have strong boundaries already, or they have a boundary wound or so on, that they can't hold those boundaries, like they're not caring for themselves. Everything is about others, which tends to lead to shame, right? Which is like, I'm not worth it. I'm not worthy. So I'm going to keep doing this because I need to prove it or so on. Then going into those types of situations, like now I have to caregive for my parent. I have to caregive for my kids, potentially a spouse, whoever else.
Yeah.
And then you throw the pandemic on it and you physically separate people out.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah.
The aftershocks of that. So to me, like when my dad got sick, everything stopped. We moved him to like Seattle for almost 2 years.
Mm.
We moved with him like for about a year or so, going back and forth. And that's at the same time I had my fourth child. My wife was doing a full-time PhD, plus working, plus our businesses and so on. It was not just strain on the caregiver, but the caregiver's family, and it's invisible to an extent. So I surf with your husband, and there's another guy out there, and I would say, "What, you working?" He's like, "No, I'm just caring for my mom." And I would think, "Oh, you're lazy initially," and then I had to do it, and then I'm like, "Oh, dude, that's the hardest job that there possibly is."
For me personally, I have had experience in my own family of family being the caregiver. My grandma on my dad's side had Alzheimer's for 10 years, and we cared for her at home the entire time. It was a family effort. My uncles, my aunties, my mom and dad, they all took turns we had a whiteboard at her house with a schedule. We had help come in. It was a very coordinated family effort. We had a family meeting, the uncles and my aunties talked, and this is how they decided to do it. And that's how it happened. And it lasted for many, many years. I had maybe a couple of aunties who said, this is beyond my boundary. I'm out. Okay, your boundary. that's good to communicate that, right? Rather than to harbor resentment. So on the one hand, I had that example.
And it didn't
And
scare you?
no, it didn't. And so when I think about my parents, I've always known that that's something that I wanted to do as much as I could. I never really thought about specific scenarios, but I think that maybe having seen the example with my grandma, I was somewhat aware of how it could be done, right? One way of how it could be done. And I knew that there are ways that I can look for help to come in or, whatever. I think that what that experience helped me also with is to anticipate, to do things before it's needed. So, for example, the good example of that is right now we're doing a major renovation on our house. And in part, that's preparation to move my mom in. There's nothing wrong with my mom right now. She's 85. She's totally independent. She lives on her own. But I'm going to have her move in because I don't want to wait until some emergency or something happens and I'm having to drop everything I'm doing and then, taking care of my mom in more of an urgent kind of a situation, right? So it's a little bit of preparation that way. Even with my mother-in-law, who's still alive at 96 years old, we've set up things to make sure that we're in communication with her. Luckily, we only live a minute away from her. My husband's in daily contact with her. We go over there often. We're doing grocery shopping and bringing over meals. I guess it's integrated into our way of life.
If you resonate with Greater Good Radio, please join our community at www.greatergoodradio.com, where you can get access to exclusive content and offerings. Hope to see you soon.